Here's a fact that should stop you in your tracks. For the first 99.9% of human existence, let me say that again, 99.9%, there was no thermostat, no ice cube, no fan with a cord, no cold drink of any kind, anywhere on Earth. And yet, humans walked out of Africa, crossed the Sahara, built cities in Egypt and Mesopotamia and Persia and Rome, built the pyramids under a sun that hits 45 degrees, raised empires in places that would cook you alive today if the power went out. All of it, every single brick, before the first air conditioner got plugged in 1902. So how? How did ancient humans survive the heat? And here's the part nobody tells you. We didn't survive the heat in spite of our biology. Heat is the reason we are who we are. You, sitting in whatever climate-controlled room you're in right now, are the direct descendant of an animal that was specifically, almost absurdly, built for the heat. That's not a metaphor. That's the entire answer to this question. And once you see it, you'll never look at a hot day the same way again. Let's go. Before we talk about mud bricks and wind towers, we have to talk about the least glamorous subject in the history of our species: sweat. Here's the thing that makes humans weird. Every animal on Earth has a cooling strategy. Dogs pant, elephants use their ears as radiators, pigs roll in mud because they can barely sweat at all. And then there's us. We are the best sweaters in the entire animal kingdom. 2 to 4 million sweat glands spread across nearly our whole body, pushing water through the skin so that when it evaporates, it carries heat away with it. We are, in the most literal sense, walking air conditioners, our own personal evaporative cooling system built in. But that's only half the story, and it's the boring half, because sweating is also why we can run. There's a theory, and honestly, it's one of my favorite ideas in all of science, called the endurance running hypothesis. It says that long before we had tools or language or fire, our ancestors survived by doing something no other animal can do. They ran prey to death. Picture it. A hunter on the African savanna, the sun overhead, the ground hot enough to hurt, and a deer, fast, agile, built to sprint. The deer wins every short race, but the deer can't sweat. It has to stop and pant. And a human, jogging steadily, sweating constantly, pouring heat off his whole body, just keeps coming. For hours. In the heat of the day, when the deer can't recover and can't cool down, the human runs it into the ground. Not by being faster, by being cooler. That is who we are. Heat didn't nearly kill our ancestors. Heat was our weapon. And one more thing, because the comments on every video like this always brings it up. Melanin. Yes, dark skin is a heat adaptation. It protects against the brutal UV of the equatorial sun. It's part of the same toolkit as sweating and our near total lack of body hair. We are a species that was, quite literally, shaped by the sun. So when you hear, how did ancient humans survive the heat? The honest answer starts with, we were designed for it. The heat isn't the anomaly in our story. The air conditioner is. But biology alone doesn't build a pyramid. Evolution gets you through a hot day. It doesn't get you through a hot millennium in a city of 1 million people. For that, ancient humans had to become engineers, and they did. Everywhere. Here's where we leave Egypt and go global, because every single hot weather civilization on Earth independently invented the same few tricks. And the biggest one is this: they made their walls do the cooling. Ancient Egyptians built their houses from mud brick, Nile silt mixed with straw, baked hard in the very sun it was meant to defeat. There's a nice irony in that. And mud brick has a property modern builders have spent decades trying to get back: thermal mass. A thick mud wall doesn't block heat, it delays it. The sun pounds the wall all day, and the heat crawls through it slowly. So slowly that the afternoon's peak heat arrives inside the house around midnight, when the desert night has gone cold and you actually want it. Then the night's cold crawls through and arrives at midday when you're desperate for it. The wall isn't insulation, it's a time machine for temperature. And the Egyptians weren't the only ones who figured it out. The same trick shows up as adobe in the American Southwest, as mud brick across Mesopotamia, as rammed earth in the Middle East and North Africa. Thick walls, high ceilings, small, high windows, because hot air rises and you want the exit near the top. Nobody was writing equations about thermal lag. They just noticed thick walls made the house better and built accordingly for thousands of years. Then came the truly clever part, the wind catcher. In Egypt, it was called a malkaf. In Persia, a badgir. Those tall, chimney-like towers you still see in the Iranian city of Yazd, some of which still work today.
The idea is beautifully simple. A hooded vent on the roof, turned to face the prevailing wind. Wind hits the scoop, gets funneled down a shaft and delivered straight into the living space. Meanwhile, hot air rises and escapes out the far side. You've built a chimney that runs sideways. No moving parts, no power source. It works because wind exists and heat rises, and both of those things will be true forever. And then this is the part that gets me. Some households put a porous clay water jar right in the path of that incoming air. Water seeps through the clay and evaporates off the surface. And evaporation steals heat from the air passing over it. That is an evaporative cooler, a swamp cooler. In principle, the exact same machine you can buy at a hardware store today for $200 running on electricity. They built it out of a pot in a hole in the roof. And I want to pause here because someone always comments, "I don't believe a wet jar cools the air." You already believe it. It's the same physics as when you step out of the shower and feel cold, or when your grandmother put a bowl of water in front of the fan. Evaporation is cooling. That's literally what your own sweat glands are doing right now, 2 million of them, all over your body. Okay, let's talk about clothes, because your instinct in extreme heat is wrong, and every ancient desert culture knew it. Your instinct is to strip off, wear as little as possible. But here's the counterintuitive truth. Loose, light-colored cloth over your skin can keep you cooler than bare skin because it blocks direct solar radiation while still letting your sweat evaporate. You lose a little airflow, you gain a lot of shade. It's exactly why desert peoples across North Africa and Arabia converged on flowing robes rather than shorts. Being naked in the desert sun isn't freedom, it's just faster sunburn. The Egyptians took it a step further with linen made from flax, and linen is almost perfectly engineered for the job. The fibers are hollow, so air moves through the weave. It wicks sweat off your skin and spreads it out where it can evaporate, and it doesn't trap heat the way wool or cotton does. In that climate, linen was close to the ideal fabric, and the Egyptians figured that out early enough that flax became one of the foundational industries of their entire civilization. But here's the detail that says everything about their society. The finest royal linen was woven so fine it was nearly transparent and took skilled weavers enormous amounts of time. The elite wore that, the fields worker wore coarse linen or simple kilts or, in a lot of cases, very little at all. Same climate, same material, radically different experience of it. The rich didn't just have more stuff, they had cooler stuff. That gap runs through this entire story, and it matters. Now, the part everyone loves, because the second great problem of surviving heat after staying cool is staying alive, which means water and salt. The Nile was right there. It was also full of silt, parasites, animal waste, and, depending on how far upstream the last village was, things you don't want to think about while drinking. A parasitic disease called schistosomiasis has actually been found in Egyptian mummies. Drinking straight from the river wasn't free, so they drank beer. Vast, structural, civilization-scale amounts of beer. And I have to be clear about what this beer was, because it wasn't a pint. Egyptian beer was thick, low alcohol, made from barley or emmer wheat, closer to a porridge than a drink. It was food, it was hydration, it was calories, and critically, the brewing process boiled the water, and fermentation made it hostile to a lot of pathogens. Beer was, for practical purposes, safer than the river it came from. How structural was this?
The workers of Deir el-Medina, the craftsmen who cut the royal tombs, got paid in bread and beer, and when those rations were delivered late under Ramesses III, around 1155 BCE, they downed tools and walked off the job. It's generally considered the first recorded strike in human history, over beer. And here's the thing, it wasn't a luxury. In that climate, the ration was the cooling system. Cut the beer and you're switching off the water supply for men doing heavy labor in a desert. And the salt? Their diet handled it almost by accident. Salted dried fish, gritty bread, potassium-rich dates and figs. Nobody was thinking about electrolytes, but a few thousand years of eating what worked and dropping what didn't produced almost exactly the mineral balance a person doing hard labor in extreme heat needs. And now, the part where everyone goes, wait, what? Because we've all been told there was no cold drink anywhere on the planet before refrigeration. That's not quite true. The ancient Persians built yakhchals, enormous dome-shaped ice houses, some still standing with thick walls and underground pits that could make and store ice in the desert. The Romans imported snow and ice from the mountains, packed it in straw, and stored it in underground pits to chill their drinks in summer. Even the ancient Chinese and Indians stored ice. Human beings have been making cold drinks for thousands of years. So no, the ancient world didn't have to suffer warm beer. It chose it. And finally, the simplest trick of all, the one we skip because it's too obvious. Ancient humans were smart enough to not be outside. The Egyptian workday started before dawn. Heavy labor happened in the cool of the early morning. The brutal midday window, the genuinely dangerous hours, was for shade, food, and sleep. Then work resumed as the sun dropped. This is not unique to Egypt, it's nearly universal. In fact, the word siesta comes from the Latin sexta, the sixth hour, noon. The Romans literally named the afternoon nap. Across Spain, Italy, Greece, North Africa, the Middle East, the pattern is identical. You bend the schedule to the sun instead of fighting it. And they had medicine for when it still went wrong. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts on Earth, dating to around 1500 BCE, contains remedies for fever, burns, and headaches, a whole catalog of heat-related illness. Some of it's magical incantation, some of it, like honey on wounds, which we now know is genuinely antibacterial, actually works. The empirical and the mystical, sitting side by side, entirely unbothered by the contradiction. Very ancient world. So here's the thing I keep coming back to, and it's slightly uncomfortable. Picture a house in Egypt 3,500 years ago. Thick mud walls holding yesterday's cool, a scoop on the roof pulling the north wind down into the rooms, a wet clay jar sitting in the airflow, quietly taking the heat out of the breeze, a family asleep on the roof under a cloudless sky, a jar of thick beer for the morning. Not one part of that requires electricity. Not one part of it breaks in a way you can't fix with mud in your own hands. It has no off switch because it has no on switch. And it wasn't arrived at by genius. It was arrived at by thousands of years of people paying close attention to what made the afternoon bearable and passing that on to their children. We've spent the last 100 years solving the same problem by putting a machine in the window and cooling one room at a time, while that machine dumps its waste heat into the street and makes the city hotter, so we buy a bigger machine. And now, architects are quietly going back to the tomb paintings at Thebes and studying the wind towers of Yazd, because it turns out a hole in the roof pointed at the wind was a genuinely excellent idea and always has been. Here's the punchline. Our ancestors survived the heat because they were tough. They survived it because they were paying attention. Mud, linen, shade, salt, and the simple willingness to rest when the sun said so. You will get warm today, and you'll do something about it, without thinking. Step into shade, find a breeze, grab a cold drink. Same species, same sweat glands, same 2% margin before the thinking starts to go. The difference is, the people who built the pyramids ran that same calculation with better architecture and worse beer. So here's my question for you. A summer in the ancient world, no fridge, no AC, a rooftop for a bedroom, and a jar of warm beer for breakfast. Could you do it? Let me know in the comments. And if this one made you see a hot day a little differently, subscribe for more. I'm Marina, and I'll see you in the next one.